Thank you, Professor Sinha. Very good morning to all of you, and my special thanks to the Institute of Mathematical Sciences for allowing us this scope of entering into the domain of scientists. One serious note of limitation. I was not here from the beginning of the workshop, that is the point. So, since I did not witness one coming virtually on the last day of the workshop, is not aware of the kind of trajectory that the workshop had. So, what I will be presenting might seem something initially, at least something not that way relevant, but I found this important for two reasons. One is we have a good participation of non-history scholars, as well as scholars having their training in early Indian history. So, we have two groups. For the second group, this might be specifically interesting because, or you find it, if not interesting, at least relevant, because you have already had some acquaintance with the script. Now from, the historical script, I am not talking about the protohistoric writing system, the Harappan script. That has a completely different set of problem that you have already, I'm sure, had discourses on. This historical scripts, if you're acquainted with the script called Early Brahmi, as we see in the first documentary evidence in Ashokan inscriptions, then it continued, as you all know, till for the next 800 or 700 years, 800 years precisely. And then from around 900 years from its first appearance, it started deviating from what you call Brahmi, and it gave birth to regional scripts. So, I'll be taking a brief tour through this journey. This part might be more relevant for the people who are trained earlier in history, and also since you have already an acquaintance with the script now for other group as well. But the second part, planned to be 60 plus 30, the second part will be on reading, and reading not undeciphered scripts, reading deciphered scripts and see the nuances of this and how even deciphered scripts can be problematic. And then I'll briefly, very briefly, for the last 2-3 minutes, I'll be talking on how these are being, even these historical texts are being encoded in modern epigraphic studies. So, we begin with this. As you all know, this is taken from one of the celebrated, now celebrated textbooks of Indian epigraphy, that by Richard Solomon. This is the general structure of the Indic script. These are vowels, then consonants, and then ligatures, and these vowel groups and consonant groups also have their specific classes as their in this way they are divided. Then we have the earliest script called Early Brahmi, which you are acquainted with. These are the consonants of the script. I'm sure you had a reading session on this already. This is the famous Rummindai pillar inscription, which is representing the normalized as it should be version of Early Brahmi. The earliest documentary evidence of Brahmi. Sorry. Now there is a controversy that whether Ashokan inscriptions represent, Ashokan inscriptions represent the earliest evidence, or we have still earlier evidence from two sites, one called Anuradhapur in Sri Lanka, and other one called Kodumanal in South India. There in Tamil Nadu, there are proposals that these sites have stratigraphic archaeological evidence of appearance of Brahmi prior to Ashokan inscriptions, but we are not to get into that controversy. Almost unanimously accepted earliest documentary evidence is this one. And not only this Rummindai, if we look at the most recently discovered inscription, this is from a place called Ghurhupur, also called Ratanpurva, in the Bhabua Plateau region of southwestern Bihar, where we have the latest discovery of an Ashokan inscription. This is not a pillar edict, it is what is called terminologically a minor rock edict of Ashoka. But we see the point of showing this is to illustrate that not only in these pillar inscriptions, but also in these rock inscriptions, we have this standard version of the script, which is not deviating in any of his edicts throughout the geographical span of his empire. The language is of course varying, but the script remains standard. And this scenario changes after the disintegration of the Mauryan polity. What happens? We have, from 1st century BCE, we have the appearance of Sanskrit as the epigraphic language. We have two what are called Middle Indo-Aryan languages in which these early inscriptions are written, I mean historical inscriptions. One is Prakrit, the other one is Sanskrit. From 1st century BCE, we see the appearance of Sanskrit in inscriptions, although heavily influenced by Prakrit, and then from around 2nd century CE, we have proper poetic refined Sanskrit characterizing inscriptional texts, and by that time also, we have a separate language that is being used for writing, because a large number of inscriptions are being written all over the subcontinent on various themes and subjects, unlike the Ashokan text, which are talking about a specific set of, which are actually conveying a specific set of messages, and the limit of content is also very defined. From post-Ashokan period, after the decline of the Maurya politics, number one is the appearance of this new language. This is a major change that is brought, that is coming in the practice of writing. The second one is the rise of these provincial polities, as it happens always after the decline of a major power. And as I said, variation in the content and purpose of inscription, not only content and purpose, but also variation in material. It is from this time that we have inscriptions on a variety of supports, what we call supports or material. In Ashokan inscription, they're exclusively stone, but then we have a wide range of material being used in writing inscriptions. All these things are triggering a shift from the standard Ashokan version of Brahmi. And finally, the last point is this one, the contemporary developments in Greek paleography. Because of continuous interaction with the Western world, this writing system, since it represents one mode of cultural expression, so it also had its take from the contemporary developments in Greek paleography, which according to scholars is most important in understanding this line of evolution. What were these changes? If we take a look, these are the top one is a coin of around 4th century BC, Greek coin, where we see the letters being written as straight lines. As you can see, I don't need to write. You can see these are being written as straight lines, sigma, omicron, all the letters. But if we take a look at these later in the Greek coins of say around 1st century, 2nd century and 1st century BCE, we see that essentially at every terminal point there is a blot or ball. As you can see in each case, here in omicron, here in sigma, here on H, here on epsilon, everywhere we have this blot. This is one. And the second one, if we look at the reverse of the coin, which is inscribed with Kharosthi letters, we see lines which are not straight but are tapering. how does this, coming to how does this happen? There are two things. One is the nature of the instrument that is being, or the tool that is being used in writing the inscription. That is something that is called a reed pen, of which the nib looks like this. The nib looks like this, the reed pen. And what is the result? It's simple. For a simple tool like this, I can do this. But if I have a nib, slanted nib, only by rolling the tip of the nib, I can control the thickness of the line, simply by rolling the nib. This is one. And the second one is, because of the use of this reed pen and ink, this blot became inevitable. So if you take a look at the Ashokan script even, there are some letters where we have one thing appearing as a ball or blot at the bottom of the letter. This is happening because they are copying this simply. This is a stylistic development based on the use of a tool that came from that side of the sea, and now they are just copying this, they are imitating this style. This is number one.
So what you're saying is that
I'll come to this again. Acha, yes, please.
the question is that even though, is this what you're saying? That even though this particular artifact of having a blob is because of the writing instrument of a pen on a plastic kind of material, but when they're copying this on a rock edict, they're actually having this, they don't need to, but they're creating this blob simply because they're copying what was originally written on papyrus or something.
What was originally written on something, even this is written on metal.
Right.
But once this becomes a style,
Right.
Or rather fashion,
Yeah.
initially as a style, then spread as a fashion, then even people internally also they copy. These are being copied on Greek coins.
Yes.
The same pattern.
Right.
And the control over line is being executed on the Greek coins themselves. And here, on a different material, it is as difficult to devise this on metal as on stone, but here they're simply copying this, imitating this on stone.
So basically what was an artifact of using a particular material becomes a stylistic feature.
Stylistic feature.
That's what you're saying.
Exactly, exactly. That is driving to the genesis of the stylistic feature. And then what are the other developments? As I said, one is because of the appearance of Sanskrit. If you remember, when you have already practiced Ashokan Brahmi, how do you write pre or pra? If this is pa, the pa with this hook is pra, with this hook is pra, and then pra with this hook is pre. So the semi-vowel is as added at the top with the guttural sound forming the second element, but intended meaning is not rpa. The intended meaning is actually pra. But they can't write this because they didn't know how to write pra. So they always added the semi-vowel ra before the consonant. This was the practice in Ashokan Brahmi. Systemic feature. I'll come to the detail of what I mean by systemic. This is a systemic feature of Ashokan script. The semi-vowel can be added after the consonant, after the consonant which forms the first element. Here, the second element is forming the first, is coming first, and then the first element comes. This is intended to be the first element, paleographically or graphically. And this is the second element. But here you see the second element comes first, and then the first element is subjoined. Okay. But here, if we see, this is an inscription. This started as early as 2nd century BC. This is dated on other historical grounds to 2nd century BC. Here we have this word called Tratarasa, where we can clearly see this ta has been added to ra in this way, whereas in Brahmi, this bra, suppose I want to write bra, then I'll do va and then ra, which means va and then ra. This should be the system, but they can't do this in Ashokan Brahmi. They are doing this in this way. The ra comes first and then the ba is added. The second element comes first, but here they have now devised how to write the second element because of the continuous use of, or this is even Prakrit, but from this time the journey started, from immediate post-Ashokan phase the journey started of this paleographic shift. This is number one. Number two is if, yes.
So you said they couldn't write, but what do you mean by couldn't write? It's a convention?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, thank you. It was this symbol of making the second element when it is the specific semivowel ra, the making of the conjunct or ligature forming the with the second element coming on its right place after the first element. This was not known to people who wrote early Brahmi. I mean Ashokan specifically, not early Brahmi. This is also early Brahmi, in Ashokan Brahmi. The reason is not, to my knowledge, known. But this became a convention, as we see in the entire Ashokan corpus. We do not have a single deviation of this in the case of this particular semivowel. I took this because immediately after the post-Ashokan, immediately after the decline of the Mauryas, we see this, that specific element coming in its proper place. So the convention is now being broken. Now a new rather pattern is emerging, where we have this in its proper order. Could I answer this to us? Second one is, although there is a major theory talking against it, but it's difficult to avoid this. If we take a look at this pa and this pa, this one and this one, if we take a careful look, this is essentially, when I write it, it has a rectangular outline, and to the left is clearly having a square outline. So squarization of letter was one major feature. And third is this one. Can you recognize what is this letter? You have, since you have already read early Brahmi, I mean Ashokan Brahmi. What is this letter? Ja, clearly. But what's the difference? Yes. That's essentially linear, whereas it is clearly curvilinear. And we have, even if we have curvilinear jaw like this in Ashokan Brahmi, we don't have this essential loop. Now, why is this loop? I'll come to that later in detail, with some details. Why is this loop coming? And new phoneme, the use of Sanskrit necessitates the use of new sounds. Suppose we have Devana Piyasa. Suppose it is written there. It has to be now Devanang Priyasya. So we have this semivowel ya attached to this, and this phoneme will require a new graph. This way, the range of graph also started extending. And the final manifestation of this comes in form in around 1st century BCE. This is the famous Hathi Gumfa inscription. I'm sorry, I don't have better photographs than this one. But here, if we take a look, this pa, ya, these two letters, clearly we have this fashion being employed here successfully. It's written as this with a tapering line. They're imitating the use of the reed pen on stone. And you have wide representation of such inscriptions on representation of this pattern in inscriptions coming from all parts of the subcontinent, starting from Mathura to eastern India. As I said, these are the results because of the spread in the range of content and purpose. We see new symbols appearing because new things, widely varying things are being written on these supports. Then this pen is introducing what we now call matra, what was at that point of time only a head mark, not a serif or matra properly, but a head mark. And a number of medial vowels. In Ashokan inscription, we have a clear formula that this is A, this is A, both joined O, this is U, this is long U, long U, I and short I. This is a clear formula for Ashokan inscriptions with one specific exception. But here we see a large number of variation of these medial vowels in the script. Why? Because oh, that is in black, you can't read it here. Because of the development of regional styles, we have a large number of variation of writing appearing in inscriptions in different parts of the country. So regional variation is the final result that is emerging from those factors that we discussed. Oh yes, it is there now in red script. So you can see this is the final result. And H. Dani is talking about as many as 6 regional varieties as early as 1st century BCE to appear on inscriptions in different parts of India. These are the 6 major regional variations that he identified way back in 1960s. I'm sure even a closer look with newer epigraphic tools will result into even more varieties of styles than these 6. And the result is this. If we juxtapose this against what we saw in Ashokan inscription, this is a clear deviation. What are the 2 basic points, or rather 3 basic points? One is we have in each case a notch at the top which is forming a head mark. Then we have the letters being squarized, and number 3, now we have some control over line, over the thickness of line with the use of this pen. What are these? This is happening between 1st and 4th century CE. From this stage, the Brahmi is being called Middle Brahmi. What are the examples? We see these head marks as a result of development of regional scripts. We have as many as 9 different kinds of head marks appearing in specific regions. So these are becoming now regional, and even in cases particularly for central India, even in cases as local conventions. Now this subcontinental or kind of national standardized monumental version used in the Ashokan script is being completely broken, and these new regional styles in the form of, appearing on the graph itself are being identified. The second one is this tendency of flourish. It was no more only conveying message. Now they are becoming elements of aesthetic expression. They are being used as works of art. They are being devised as works of art. That something that will lead to what we'll be calling calligraphy in late stage, still later. We have the medial vowels being added with flourishes. So this use of flourish. And secondly, you see, finally, the use of a large number of variety in the use of medial vowels. Even one, suppose one A is being written in various forms, sometimes this way, sometimes this way, sometimes this way. In these various forms, these medial vowels are being written because you don't have that central control over the system of writing. Regional expression is now being well accepted. And this is from, this is my own drawing, but this is from, the last one is from Dani's textbook, where you see how the letters are developing and giving rise to what we call late Brahmi. In the between the 1st and the 4th century CE, this entire process takes place. And as a result, we have further variation in the system of writing. Now, as many as 9 local varieties, regional and local varieties can be identified in script. One of these, if you take a closer look, one of these is what he called inner Madhya Pradesh. In the backward areas of central India, even within central India, there were 2 identifiable groups of writing being practiced around the 3rd, 4th century CE. If I go back here and see the very first one, what is this? This is Ta, the letter Ta in early Brahmi. We remember this Ja, and here also we have this Ta. Now, I was talking about this loop. Why is this loop coming? Any clue? Any one of you? This is because of the development of one specific characteristic, what you call cursive writing. It is one of our basic tendencies that we don't want to lift the pen from the surface on which we write. If we did not have this instinct, writing would have never evolved from one form to the other. We have a tendency, we are being asked to practice from a childhood that practice cursive. So it's because of this cursive, these loops and rolls are characterizing the script. This is one primary character that is the feature of this late Brahmi. And if you now take a look of the 4th century, it's again one step ahead of what we see in the 1st century BCE. This is 4th century CE. And now we have, because of regular use of Sanskrit, we have a large number of ligatures coming in. In Ashokan inscriptions, what we see, we have a set pattern. Dani talked about this theory of first element and second element in forming ligatures and consonants, and he talked about 10 sets of second, what he called SE or second element. when the letter va is forming the second element, when ra is forming second element, when tha is forming. This way he gave a list of 10 second elements based on which these ligatures are formed. These also are formulaic, but here these that set of formula does not work, because you have a large number of, a bewildering number of new symbols appearing in inscriptions. Sounds appearing in inscriptions because of the language being used. And those sounds will require new symbols. Therefore, they're devising new symbols for ligatures. Yes?
So I'm curious, like what led to the development of ligatures specifically in Indic writing system, because we don't see them in the neighboring cultures.
In the neighboring cultures, yes. One thing which was observed first by S.R. Langdon, then by J.H. Hunter, and finally and most significantly by D.C. Sarkar, and also Richard Salomon seems to support him. I know this statement might have some risky implications, but as a matter of fact, we have to remember that if we take a look at the Harappan script, if this is a man, symbol for anthropos, and this one is forming the symbol of a net, we have a specific symbol with this one. So you have two elements being subjoined to form something which has a completely different meaning. Completely different meaning. This is one. And if we have this one, and then from this one, we only add two diacritical marks, and the meaning changes. A standing man is now a walking man. These are for easy examples. Both these things characterize Harappan writing system as well as historical Brahmi system, historical system of writing, which is coextensive with Brahmi. I'm not considering Kharosthi here. We add one diacritical mark, the vowel length changes, and we add one graph. It has a completely different sense, phonetic sense. How this is developing, unlike neighboring cultures, is something that I'm not having any specific cue. When it comes to neighboring cultures where they are not doing this, of course, the contemporary in Old Persian cuneiform, we don't see this, although these were connected regions, heavily connected regions. But yes. Sorry?
Could it be because prosody, Chandas and Matra were an integral form of all literature? Accurate representation was important. So, the ligatures had to evolve to fit into that if you're writing. And
then the question comes, why in Harappan script also we have the same feature? We simply do not have any idea of the language that was being used. This we have to accept. For the historical phase, for historical system of writing, yes, this works, this logic. But how do you explain then although they are widely separated by time, but how do we explain in proto-historic system the same pattern is again difficult. But this has to be taken as a matter of fact, and this was rightly pointed out by these early scholars in the 1930s and 1960s for the case of the Harappan script. And here now you have this famous, I'm sure some of you at least can recognize the inscription. This is the famous Allahabad inscription of Samudragupta, where we have all these features. Number one, the proper appearance of a head mark, which will soon turn into matra. Number two, the use of flourish, the medial vowel. How do we know that the flourish is being used? The medial vowel is not being written in terms of a formula or following a formula. They are being written according to the composer's choice. And number three, an essentially cursive style of writing. All these things are characterizing the script in the 4th century. A far better example is this one, which is the Kahome. Oh yes, it's written there. So here we see all these characteristics, all these features characterizing the script in the early period. And how we see the regional manifestation of this. You will be seeing this inscription soon. I'm sure this is one of those inscriptions that you will be seeing this inscription very soon when Professor Pal talks about the actual reading method. This is from Eastern India, and this one is the Middle Gangetic Valley variety of writing of almost the same time. This is about mid 5th century or second half of 5th century, and this is mid 6th or early 6th century. Yes, please.
Sir, question about evolution when it comes to, say, Tamil. The conjuncts are written on either side, but not stacked like here. What could be the reason for that?
For South Indian script, what was your question?
See, as you see here, they're stacked one below the other, the conjuncts. But in Tamil, they're written on either side.
Yes, they're being written side by side. Then the second element is the one to the right. Here in North Indian system, you have the conjunct or ligatures are in vertical order. But in the entire South Indian belt, from a very early phase, even in Deccan, there are cases where this vertical pattern is broken. For example, if I am having this, then it's being added here instead of below.
Any reasons that could have happened?
Again, the only explanation is complete freedom from the strict vertical structure. Why it is happening in South India, specifically why it is happening, is difficult to explain. It's impossible to explain. How it's happening is rather easier to show, because in terms of documentary evidence. Do we have really any clue? I don't know. Do we have any really clue to define why, to specifically answer why in one region this is forming a vertical frame, and in another region it's forming a semi-vertical frame, and then a pure horizontal frame? We really don't have answers. These are only conventions. For example, we write one specific letter in Bangla in its normalized version in a particular form. When it comes to cursive style, its pattern is different. Can we answer why it is different? I don't think for any script prevalent in South and Southeast Asia, including Southeast Asia, this is possible to answer. But what we can do is we can decode the pattern, how they're being formed this way over time. Then I was talking about the systemic feature. This is early Brahmi, middle Brahmi, and late Brahmi, 3rd to 1st century BCE, then 1st century BCE to 2nd, 3rd century CE, then 4th to 6th century CE. These are the chronological spans. This is early Brahmi, this is middle Brahmi, this is late Brahmi, the structure of the consonants. What I mean by systemic change is not individual paleographic characteristics. You might say, what is precisely, is it really very different from this ka to this ka? No, it's not. If we take a closer look, of course, this ka is straight and simple line. It's a tapering line, then a notch above, and even this line is being controlled like this with a thick line in the middle. At a closer look, this is the difference. But is this single paleographic difference is the marker of the change? No. The point is, if we take a snap of this, you take a snap of this, a snap of the entire structure, and then take a snap of this structure of consonant. The snap varies. The entire gamut forming the formed with the consonants, this entire picture changes, the snap changes immediately. The same way, in early Brahmi, when this change is not in individual paleographic characteristics, but in the entire snap, that has to be recognized as a systemic change. So this systemic change does not take place in a period of, say, a century or 50 years. This takes at least a couple of centuries to emerge. And we see from early to late, it took about, say, as I said, 800 to 900 years, grossly 300 years each to develop, to identify separate, distinct snaps from one another. So this is the journey from early to late, and from 6th century we see further development following the same lines. We have to remember the three basic characteristics. One is head mark, the second one is flourish, the third one is what you call cursive. But here you see the scribe, the composer is specifically using some flourishes, writing with flourishes which are not necessary, but it has a pattern in it. If we see all the ra and ya vowels, semi-vowels, when they are forming part of a ligature, they have a specific pattern, this pattern. It is characterizing the entire text throughout. It is from this time that Brahmi starts emerging into new scripts. And this has been called the Siddhamatrika script. I am talking about North India specifically. The whole thing has been on North India, I am sure you have observed already. What is being called Siddhamatrika and what are called, this is again written in black script, so this font color was black and it's not appearing properly. It's what are called proto-regional, please fill in that gap with proto-regional scripts. From 6th century onwards, we see the development of proto-regional scripts. It's a different, I should mention that it is the time from when we see changes characterizing Indian society, polity, religion, and economics havoc, and we have newer social and political formations and cultural formations in early Indian history, which are being understood in terms of what we now call early medieval, or transition from early historic to medieval. And this, at this point of time, as script is nothing but a medium of expression of culture, this is changing, and this name Siddhamatrika is derived from one specific text, I'll come to that, but earlier scholars termed them under various names called acute angled script or Kutila script or Vikata script, and even they were called early Nagari scripts by some scholars. But it was DC Sarkar who first identified, based on Al-Biruni's Kitab al-Hind, that these two scripts, Siddhamatrika and Gaudi, were the scripts of the early medieval period, specifically the second one specifically belonging to Eastern India. And again, I'm sure these black things are not being, this is Al-Biruni. Then you have this two Eastern Indian scripts called Gaudi, and sorry, the earlier and larger geographically wider variety called Siddhamatrika. He is talking about these scripts and how these proto-regional scripts are developing, if we see them, in the form of a diagram. The North Indian variety is again divided into two broad groups of of the Middle Gangetic Valley and Eastern India. And there is some confusion in the word itself. I would just like to mention in passing that whether this Siddhamatrika, as it is now being recognized as Matrika, coming from the root word Mata, and there are also evidence in early Indian intellectual tradition that Matrika, later an Akshara is being called a Matrika, but possibly the spelling has to be not Matrika, but possibly it's Matrika, because why is the name Siddhamatrika? This is the time when you have, from this head mark or notch or serif, you have a proper, smaller but proper matra added to the top of the letter. So here possibly the matra or serif is being justified. That's why it's being called Siddhamatrika. Although we have to remember that in Arabic he was not allowed, this person Al-Biruni was not allowed to write this Adikar. So if he was conditioned not to write 3 as Tari, then how could he write? So this remains a possibility, but the name is possibly not the first 3, but not the top 3, but the lower 3 one. So what are the characteristics? Number 1 is, this is acute angled. Second is, this is having proper matra, and now the script is being written in what we call non-Indo-Aryan languages, from the Middle Indo-Aryan to New Indo-Aryan, and this specifically inscriptional Sanskrit called epigraphical hybrid Sanskrit. Those stages are now over. From this time onwards, the script is being written in non-Indo-Aryan languages, different proto-regional languages, and the script is proto-regional, that is Siddhamatrika, and these are the characteristics. You see them appearing in the inscriptions. The flourish is going to this extent. We have the medial vowels having this cursive and flourish forms, and also sometimes at point it's difficult to recognize the specific medial vowel that is intended, but the point are the characteristics. Why it was being earlier called acute angle, because this is forming an acute angle with the surface, the vertical element of the script. Everywhere if you take a look, all the scripts are, all the letters, the vertical element of the letter is bent, and it's forming an acute angle with the horizontal plane. And number 2 is it's having proper matra added at the top. So, possibly the name justified matra or Siddha Matrika. This is the formation. Since this is very close to modern Nagari, many of the letters can be readily read. But again, the Siddha Matrika was not a chronologically uniform or homogeneous script. It had its early form and also had its late form. We have the last picture or a photograph of text that you saw was that of a 6th century inscription, and this is a 7th century inscription, the famous Harshavardhan inscription with his quote unquote signature, where we see the first proper appearance of Siddha Matrika, what we prefer to call now early Siddha Matrika, which is characterizing North Indian writing system between the 7th and say 7th and early 8th century. This is the image of that same text. This is another image of the same period coming from Eastern India with a completely different regional style. And then in its mature phase around 9th century, this is the structure of the alphabet that we see in Siddha Matrika, and this is the entire structure of the vowels and consonants as well as the ligatures. And this is the appearance of it on one of the inscriptions from Eastern India, but almost throughout Northern India we have the same use of the Siddha Matrika until the 9th, till the 9th century, after which it again deviates. So, this was the first phase of my talk. What we see is from the 3rd to the 1st century BCE, a linear development, and from the 1st century BCE till the 7th century, and still after that, we have essentially regional developments in the writing systems of early India. I mean, specific writing system called Brahmi in early India, and 3 factors were crucial. One was the use of new tool, second was the change in language, and third one was our tendency of cursive writing. These 3 factors actually resulted into this evolution. So, before we proceed further with an attempt to see how we read inscriptions, other queries if there are.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. It was like thorough reading and going back to epigraphy studies. So I wanted to ask, early Nagari script are essentially regional. When we see inscriptions from Orissa dated to early 7th century, there are some as we say, proto-Odia script or letters we can find. I mean, it's very minimal in number, but we can find it there. So, sir, what could be the reason behind it? I mean, it's an early Nagari script, and also this Odia terms or letters we can find. Totally region-based.
Thank you. What's your name, you know?
Devankita.
Devankita. Thank you, Devankita, for asking this question. I'll begin with the statement that we have to remember that since the 1920s, after the discovery of Harappa and with more and more discoveries, unfortunately, Indian paleographic studies has concentrated only and only on the decipherment of Harappan scripts. We have made much progress in epigraphic studies, but paleography of the historical period has been essentially neglected. Since the 1960s, there has been no attempt of looking at paleographic issues involved in the study of early Indian epigraphy, leaving a few exceptions. Of course, there is one good work from your region, from Odisha as well. The result is this: what you call early Nagari is not early Nagari. The early set of Odishan inscriptions ranging between the 7th, 6th and the 8th centuries that you are talking about, those are essentially early Siddhamatrika script. Early Nagari will develop at a much later stage, around say 10th century in North India, in the domain, in the area between the Gangetic Doab and the Middle Gangetic Valley. Below that, we again, even half of the Middle Ganga Valley precisely speaking, and half of the Middle Ganga Valley and the entire east will then be predominated by Siddhamatrika, including Assam, Odisha, from which we will have a passage to Gauri, which is again being used throughout eastern India. The Proto-Odia that you were talking about, I'm sorry I don't have that photograph, that Proto-Odia is coming not before 15th century in Odishan inscriptions. Neither the language nor the script. For Bengal, the language of course comes much earlier, but the script, what we call Proto-Bengali, is not coming at least before the 14th, late 14th, early 15th, and the case is same for Assam, for Eastern Indian scripts. Problem is, we have not concentrated on proto-regional scripts. That is why there is a fantastic article by Lore Sandar called Confusions of Term and Terms of Confusions in Indian Terms of Confusion in Indian Paleography. These terminologies that we often use, Siddhamatrika, Gaudi, Dravidi, Nagari, Proto-Nagari, Ardhanagari, and many other terms based on, of course, Al-Biruni, although he is not always recognized, but those are based on the 11 scripts. He specifically and carefully noted down our date to that person that we know of these terms at least. When we are using these, it's very important to take case-wise study based on individual epigraphic texts or a set of texts, and then have their paleographic forms extracted from the text through digital tools and compare them, compare the forms against one another, and then prepare an index. If we are able someday to make such indices for at least one region, even for Eastern India or for Western Deccan, we can have several such indices if we look at specific inscriptions. We have to reproduce the inscription following modern methodologies. Then we have to, I was coming to that in the second part. Now, thanks to you that I now begin with that thing. That will need a completely different methodology possibly. Even for deciphered scripts. We know, yes, this we know, this is much late. But this is something that we really do not know. What we know is the script between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE time bracket when it comes to historical scripts. The proto-regional scripts, for which we have enormous scope to collaborate with scientists and paleographists. This collaboration is very important. If we do this, only then we will have a proper understanding of even terminologies. Could I explain your point?
Yes, sir.
So,
this
what we are talking about are Siddhamatrika scripts. Those are not early Nagari. Okay.
So this confusion actually arose from S.K. Acharya's inscriptions of Odisha. I mean, so there it's written, I mean, basically for Bhumukara inscriptions, etc., it's written in also Tungo inscriptions.
Yes, I remember.
Proto-Nagari.
I was referring to that particular
Yeah.
work. It's really great work, because he is the only person who has concentrated in these proto-regional scripts. But again, we need to look at the larger canvas and then name a particular script. Without looking into the larger canvas, it's difficult. And when it comes to Odisha, it's certainly early Siddhamatrika and not early Nagari.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, yes, please, please.
Hello. To add something to Rajat's explanation, we cannot link the emergence of script with the development of polity unless we see that when do we find the development of regions in early Indian history. That is, all the regional polities emerged in the post-8th century period, and unless and until you have the emergence of the region, the regional identity, you cannot have the regional scripts, and you also cannot have the proto-regional scripts. So all the proto-regional scripts should be logically be dated in the post-9th and 10th century period, and we cannot probably date any proto-regional script before the 9th, 10th century, if you place it historically.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. The proto-regional script and then the regional script.
Sir, I have
Yes, for the entire early span from the post-Gupta phase has to be for North India, early Siddhamatrika.
Sir, I have a suggestion and actually an observation.
Yes.
You know, the usage of labels, essentially dynastic or regional labels, is the cause for confusion. If instead of that we could say this geography, this time period, we would not have any such issue at all. But it's unfortunately too long into this one. Epigraphist historians have been calling it scripts by, you've been referring to as the Gupta script.
Yes.
Now
yes.
that's, no Gupta king had a role in that script. No Gupta king actually dictated it be written like that.
It was recognized long back. That's why I have been carefully using the term early, late Brahmi or so. When I went, I took the name of the dynasty because I took the cue from
Sure.
there was a pulse words that it's when the polities are regional polities are being formed from the post-Gupta phases and still later, only then we have these proto-regional scripts. In that sense, I use the dynastic
This is
level.
a problem with
Of
students.
course,
It's an
yes.
even bigger problem with the general population.
Yes.
It kind of distorts the story.
Mauryan Brahmi, Kushana Brahmi, Gupta Brahmi, these had nothing to do with the Mauryas or Kushanas or the Guptas or even the later polities. These were expressions of the mass, so of course they have to be identified in terms of specific chronologies and geographies. Rather, geography A, chronology 1, so A1 and then B2 and B1 and then C1, C2 and C3, that would be even more logical than these terms. But of course, when it comes to proto-regional scripts like Siddhamatrika, we have to have some specific names for them for one region. For, as I said, for North India, it's Siddhamatrika. For South India, it's Grantham and later scripts. For Kashmir, it's Sharada. We have these names clearly identifiable at a later stage, of course, as she said. Yes.
Sir, so I have always wondered about this use of na, not n, but ya,
Yeah.
the ingo and ungo. So during, at least in say very early, during Ashokan Brahmi, I mean not Ashokan, early Brahmi, 3rd century Brahmi. So around that time we find only one single use of a dot after, usually after n, after na. So and in the later period, if I am to make a big jump, then like say around the early medieval 6th and 7th century.
Or even the 4th century CE.
Yeah, okay. So, and particularly I'm talking about the Eastern India. So after a while we get a very specific use of these two alphabet. It comes, and then there are conjunct letters along with it.
Ligatures being formed with these two nasal sounds that you're talking
Yes,
about.
and
yes.
there are like very particular pronunciation of it and use of it. So, can you tell us something about the
Possibly it was not required in the compositions of the early period. So we don't have any specific occurrence of these two nasals, the guttural and the palatal nasal sounds, and nya. These two are not there in these early inscriptions. Only with the coming of this epigraphic hybrid Sanskrit that we see the emergence of these two letters necessitating the text, I mean required in the text, and therefore, and they can't be, since they can't be pronounced independently, they are only forming the first element of a ligature. Always you see in the, from inscriptions of 3rd century CE onwards, we see these two nasal sounds forming the first element of ligatures. It is, here the reason is language.
So, like, do we have a specific time when these two
From 3rd
letters-
century CE, they are, in terms of documentary evidence, from 3rd century CE, they are appearing.
Okay, and so I would like to
Or
like,
say
clarify.
rather precisely, or rather, rather safely speaking, 4th century CE, they are appearing as parts of ligatures in not only scripts of northern India, also scripts of eastern India and Deccan. These
And,
two nasal sounds are coming.
Tell me if I'm this is just a hypothesis that I want to clarify. Is this particularly, it comes with the use of hybrid epigraphic Sanskrit, or does this have something to do with the coming of Proto-Munda into the use of Proto-Munda into the
These are
Eastern
not the-
Indian languages?
These I'm not the best person to answer, but I don't think it has something to do with anything else than the coming of EHS.
Okay.
I think. I'm not getting into that point of what you called coming of Proto-Munda. I'm not getting into that. Possibly it's the advent of EHS that is necessitating this appearance of these ligatures. Yes, Mr. Sinha, please.
Hi, so I'm just thinking that, if I think this in parallel with the almost contemporary script, the Latin script. So the Latin script would also have originated, something like 2nd century BCE, and then, it would have given birth to the scripts used by, most of the European languages. But we don't see that much variation from the Latin script. So how is it that in the subcontinent we had a huge degree of variation from the mother script? Whereas for an almost contemporaneous script over almost
don't
the same period, we don't have that variation.
Yes,
Do you
I
have
think-
any hypothesis as
Yes.
to?
I think it's the variation that characterizes us. It's the element that is inherent in the subcontinent's culture. That is variation. That's the reason that a script, which was of course one integral element of the cultural expression, it also followed the same line of continuously varying from one region to the other. It's because of I think geography played a major role in this, which did not in other parts of other contemporary cultures as it did in India.
But if you
Yes,
look
vernaculars.
if you look at the geographic extent over which Latin alphabet is being used, in currently, for example, stretches
Yes, it's
from
quite
stretches from the British Islands
Yes,
all
of
the
course,
way
of course.
to,
But as
let's say, Hungary, right?
Yes.
So that's almost the extent of South Asia.
Yes, but
And there is
as-
also a geographic variation there. So
As
culturally, what might have
Yes,
been different?
as she said, do we have the development of the vernacular idioms as we have here in India in other parts of the
No,
world?
you do. Like, for example, all the development, the Romance language, Germanic languages, these are quite distinct, right? I mean, so
Of course.
linguistic wise, there's a huge variation, right?
Yes, but the script,
But the script remained almost the
because
same.
this standardization was never questioned. Here, this standardization was being questioned immediately after the decline of the Maurjas. And even this is almost an unanimously accepted hypothesis that there was no regional variation in Ashokan script. Everything was the changes that we see in different geographical areas are because of individual hands. Then if again this individual hand is recognized, what's the harm in accepting the regional hypothesis, regional variation hypothesis for Ashokan script? This has to be again studied, because we must remember that individual Ashokan inscriptions being scanned and paleographically studied is not the case. So we don't have a study focusing precisely on individual Ashokan. I was discussing this with Nandini the other day. For that case, we have to again digitize all the Ashokan texts and take paleographs from them individually and prepare index, and then we'll be able to see that we are talking about a standardized version. Of course, it was at least quasi-standardized, but to what extent it was unchanged throughout the subcontinent. I think it was inherent in the Indian culture that we, from one zone to the other, things were continuously, I mean, all the expressions of culture were continuously varying, and since script was only a part of it, it was no exception to that. That there possibly lies the answer. Yes, the second one, which is a brief, I'll just exemplify, not that this will not be a proper reading session. I'll focus on two inscriptions that we recently read. Of course, late inscriptions, because I always deal with these late scripts. You can do this now or even later, because I have to send them a separate reading material as well. You can circulate, yes, they can take a look. The question is how inscriptions are read. I'll try to illustrate with this image. This I received over WhatsApp during those COVID days. Only Bengali people can read this, not because they are acquainted with the script. My point is, even if somebody acquainted with the Bengali script can't read this unless he knows the language. Okay, only the laughing faces are Bengali faces because they know the language. So this is so badly written with wrong spellings, wrong graphs, everything is here. It came from a village shop somewhere in Medinipur in 2021. Keep distance, use mask is written here in Bangla. But you see the script and the language in which it is written. So it is only possible when you know both the things. Only knowing the script will not help. And for our case, it's important. So he decoded it.
I wouldn't have, unless you have told me that this is the context. There's no way. I thought it was something maaf korun.
Initially, I also read Maaf Korun.
For those who don't know the Bengali, can you please read this?
Sorry.
Can
yes.
you please read this? I can't.
Yes. Can I translate? Should I translate?
Yeah.
This is written as I said, keep distance, duratto bajay rakhun, maintain distance, and use mask. This is one of those COVID days placard in a small village shop where he hanged this for his customers that maintain physical distance and use mask, wear mask.
Don't worry, I know Bengali, even I wouldn't have figured it out.
Yes.
Unless you told me what.
Okay. So.
What is wrong with this?
Sorry, his point is important. Please. What was your point? Explained? My point. Even a person who reads Bengali couldn't read it for 2 minutes. The point is, yes, yes. This first line should be, there are spelling errors, problems in graph, in sentence making everywhere. It should be the first line should be like this. Just read the first line. This should be the normalized graph, and that's what is written there. So even if you know the script, even if you read Bangla, you can't read it unless you have the sense of the context as well as the language. That was my point to make. This is key to reading inscriptions when even the script is known, deciphered script. I'm not talking about undeciphered things. So this is, I'll just exemplify very briefly, because a reading session is not possible in not only in this within this short span of time, but also with this knowledge base, because for this you have to first practice the graph and then you can only go for readings. I'll send a reading material separately, as I have already told you, a proper table with some with digital images of these texts. I hope you will be able to read in 7 days of practice or so. This is one image that was found from Nalanda, the village in which Nalanda is located, Badgaon. It has been photographed since 1960s, but I have never seen anything written on this by either art historians or historians of religion or others, although it has a long inscription here on the halo of it. This surface was specifically prepared for writing an inscription. This is the inscribed surface. We could read this only because we could read these three names here. One is the name of the deity, other is one specific attribute of the deity, and the third one is a mantra related to the identity of the deity. Here is the name of the deity, Avalokiteshvara, then we have his attribute, his form, particular form called Amogha Pasha, then one of his heart mantras which is written there. We had the lead to reading this inscription based on these three names first read on them. Then I found that this entire inscription, this is not my photograph, this I took from Susan, I should have written the courtesy here, I'm sorry. This I took from John, this was kindly shared by John Huntington, who had photographed it way back in 1969. Here you see this image, this is possibly the longest inscribed image anywhere, so at least so far published. This is the longest inscribed image. I have not seen any other image, inscribed image carrying an inscription of this length. It has as many as 22 or 23 lines. Now I realize, a few months back I went to Nalanda and then again went to the village and found that along the border of this, on the top border of this, there is an inscription which we did not notice earlier, so that part remains still undeciphered. So this entire surface was used for writing inscription. I will just request you to take note of one specific thing. In this entire composition, do you see any deviation? Paleographically, graph-wise. In this entire composition, do you find it a uniform, homogeneous composition, or is there something different in this? Please take a careful look at this in this photograph on the slide, not on the hard copy page. There you can't recognize with that small photograph. I'll share the digital photo by Monday. Do you see any deviation? Which one is different? Can you please come and show us? Which part is different? Yes, and? So, yes, thank you. From here to here is one specific graph. The same graph is being followed here to here, but these two lines, this one and this one, are different. You see, as we did it with the help of a software, these two are the lines which are different. That is because this image was inscribed at different points of time. It started with this, and this is the thing that I would request you to read, because this is something very known to all of us. I mean, even for people not specializing in Buddhism. It talks about this ubiquitous kind of what is called a formula. Earlier it was called a creed, the Buddhist formula of taken from a text, ye dharma hetu prabhava hetu teshang, etc. This is written there, but in a script which does not tally with the script that precedes and succeeds it. This formula is, it starts from here, and it continues throughout, and the next line also it continues from here again. The script changes. The reason is, when the image was prepared, it was prepared for writing a specific text, what is called Amogha Pasha Hridaya Dharani. This is a text of which we have several transmitted varieties being transported from India to China and then to Japan, from the entire East Asian dominion between the 8th and the 10th centuries, and that a version of that dharani, not always conforming to what we see in the transmitted text, one version of that dharani is written here. There are deviations from the text. It was meant to write this dharani. It started with this around 7th century, because one clear characteristic of 7th century writing, this, as I was showing, which started in the 6th century and continued till 7th century, is this elongation of the second element. Suppose this elongation of the second element appears, and this continues for only these two lines, line number 5 and 6. So somebody, we do not know who did it, because that part is damaged, unfortunately. The identity of the person who dedicated this image or wrote this inscription is not readable. This person started this inscription with that Buddhist formula sometime in the 7th century, and then he stopped. For reasons unknown, that text was not written, was not completed at that point of time. It was again started by someone after a gap of at least 1 century from this. Therefore, these two lines are separated from the other lines. Since now you have the chart that Nandini had shared, can you identify either on your hard copy or on this, because the text looks like this, horrible. This is the text of this part. So only this portion in red, can you identify any of the letters of this red marked area based on your practice sheet? Any one of you? That's why I said reading session would be possible only when we have some acquaintance with that script. For early Brahmi, we can readily have a reading session because you know how to read it. But here, for reading a known script, what we often call a late script, even for that known range of script, what is written here is that a part of the text which is written on your hard copy at the top of the text. At the top of the text of your hard copy, the first sheet, you will see that formula written there. And here, the red marked portion shows the paleography of that text. What we need to do is to have acquaintance with this specific text of this chronological span from this specific region, and then try to read it. Comparatively easier would be this one. This is one that we read recently. This one is on copper. That one was on stone, and this one is on copper, where at least some of the letters can be easily identified, I'm sure. If we begin from top, here we can read what is this letter. Yes. What is this? This one. Then this one. Then this one. This one. Then this one. This one. It looks like ya, but it's sa. Then this one. It looks like dha, but it's va. I have given this photograph as well. I'll share digital photo of this along with the text for you to practice and then decipher. That reading session has to be at home because we do not know. Here I have the text and the text from line 30 and up till line numbers 35 and against the plate. In your handout you have the same thing, the text and the plate, but the problem is you didn't have time to practice this in Nandini's chart. It's there in Nandini's chart. The same script is there in her chart. The last column, I think. Last column, if I remember. So, if you practice that last column, only then you will be able to. This was, both are in prose. These are not in verse. Very soon you will see a reading in verse, but both of these are in prose. One from text, other one composed originally by somebody for the first time. But in both the cases, one is dated to 7th and 8th century, the other one to 10th century, mid-10th century. Both are Siddhamatrika. This is a transitional script from Siddhamatrika to Gaudi. It's mid-8th century. It's showing all the characters of transition. But the point is, we need to first familiarize ourselves with the script that we are reading. Therefore, the reading session will be at home. I'll share material with you, and we can be in touch for continuing this reading session.
What is the name you are given for these inscriptions?
What
is the name?
For this inscription or for this script?
Inscription.
These are copper plate inscriptions.
Okay, no. What is the name? Is it published earlier in some?
It's published now. Only
What
a
is
few months back we published.
In what name?
Its
name.
The name is it's preserved in a private collection. Copper plates are, the convention is the copper plates are named based on their find spots.
Okay.
Suppose a copper plate is found in Chennai, it's called the Chennai copper plate of Rajanar Chola.
Okay. Then
But
why I am
here,
asking is,
in this case, this is, its find spot is not known. So we published it as an unpublished copper plate of a Pala king called Rajyapal.
okay.
So the text is now published. It
Suppose
came
you are
out a few
talking
months.
with this to others, but somebody will ask what is the name of the where it is available or something. That's what I
Yes,
asked.
that I can share. That I can share the published account. It's kept in a private collection in Kolkata. It's copper plate of a Pala king, but its name is unpublished copper plate from Kolkata. Because for name convention, we don't have any identification for this. Sorry? Which software?
Used. Yeah. Is it de-stretch?
Not the stretch. One of my collaborators, he did it for me actually. I have to again, now I'll have to memorize the name. This was not my task, this was his part of job. After I identified this, he, time is,
So let's thank Professor Rajesh Sanyal for a wonderful talk. And I'm sure all of you have still questions to him, but we could
yes,
take
we
it
can
outside
continue
for
discussing.
coffee.
Yes, yes.
And we'll try to be back here by 12 for the next talk by Professor Shantanu.
Thank you for your patience.